As a quick heads up, this chapter is going to be somewhat shorter than usual. There are numerous reasons for this, but the most prominent ones being a split between the author needing more time to write more, and me having other, somewhat more pressing voice acting obligations that I have to attend to today. Nonetheless, this chapter is still relatively meaty, so I hope you enjoy, even though it's a bit on the short side. I'll stop talking now and let you get to the chapter. Chapter 41. Facing the Consequences, Part 1. Out of everything that had happened today, Twilight was at least thankful that Sweet Apple Acres was so remote. The long walk through the orchard was just what the doctor ordered for her to calm down her agitated nerves. It hadn't been an easy decision she had made, and now she was left to wonder if it had even been the right one. Momentary feelings of regret were enough to make her reconsider her actions, and passively see if there was still a way to wiggle her way out of this. The 3 guards who had come to collect her now surrounded her and Spike in a triangular formation, 2 behind and the leader in front, meaning that there would be no way for Twilight to abort this mission without at least one of them seeing her book it. As such, she was in this for the long haul. Once they got back into town, everyone would know about her being an alicorn. It was a worthy sacrifice to take some of the attention off Spike, but that didn't mean she wanted to make it.
Twilight?
Spike whispered at her, drawing her attention away from her thoughts.
Everything's gonna be okay, right?
Of course. I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't sure.
A confident smile accented Twilight's lie, enough to convince Spike to ease up, which in turn served as a great way to help Twilight calm down.
It might be rough for a bit, but we'll get through it.
That part, at least, wasn't a lie, though it was meant more for herself than for Spike. She needed to remind herself that this wasn't the end of the world, even though it felt like everything was collapsing at the seams around her. This was undoubtedly going to cause a lot of problems, maybe even more than it would fix. It was all becoming clear, and panic continued to fester behind her calm facade, which she held on to for Spike's sake. The moment someone saw her wings, a chain reaction would start. News of the sudden appearance of a previously unknown alicorn would spread like wildfire through the town. From there, it wouldn't be long before it spread far and wide across Equestria. For the most part, Twilight figured that most individuals would write it off as a tall tale or lie, but there would be those who believed it. And even without this parade through Ponyville, with how many people had seen her today, it would have only been a matter of time for this news to reach the right ears anyway. Queen Celestia would hear about this before long, and she would be among those who believed the story. And Twilight didn't even want to think about all the possible ways that conversation could go. Thankfully, a distraction from these thoughts made itself known.
Did he just talk?
The guard to the left muttered in shock, slowly stammering through the question, as if trying not to offend them. Her eyes were locked on Spike.
Yes, he did.
Twilight managed to reply, keeping her voice calm, even though she was offended by the way the guard had started to word her sentence.
And he has a name. It's Spike.
Hi.
Spike gave a cheesy, toothy grin, and a nervous wave to the quizzical mare observing him intently. This had gotten the attention of the other guard, and he similarly peered around Twilight.
Whoa, how'd you teach him to do that?
He asked with absolute wonder, trying to get as good a look as he could without breaking formation. It wasn't an outlandish question. Twilight could at least accept that, even if it looked more like he had just seen an animal perform an impressive yet novel trick. While they weren't ideal, these kinds of reactions were to be expected. Twilight was just going to have to get used to them.
The same way you teach a foal,
she replied blankly.
I just talked to him. read to him, helped him build up a vocabulary. Nothing out of the ordinary.
Must be a pretty clever little critter then, the guard idly commented. What is he then? Some kind of magic iguana? Okay, that was just absurd. It had been less than half an hour ago that these two guards had been trying to bound and gag Spike thinking he was a wild animal. And now here they were playing a game of 20 questions as Twilight trying to figure out everything they could about him. Gave Twilight some hope that maybe the townsfolk would be accepting of Spike without too much fuss, but it was still irritating. The worst part? They didn't even seem to acknowledge that Spike was there, speaking around and above him, like he was a pet or accessory. She could only imagine how humiliating that must be for him to sit through, especially after everything that had happened today. She didn't even need to look to know he must have been trembling under their gazes, and it likely didn't help that they had tackled him to the ground earlier. Save the questions for the station. The older guard leading the way was quick to interject, much to Twilight's relief. They went back to their formation and returned to their stoic exteriors, though occasionally they still stole glances at Spike. Nonetheless, the change got Spike to loosen up a bit, which in turn got Twilight to relax. Right now, every concern in her head was centered on making sure that Spike got out of this mess as smoothly as possible. Twilight was already well practiced with dealing with anxieties, but Spike wasn't. She could count the number of times she had witnessed this sort of thing affecting Spike on her hooves, and most of those incidents had happened within or very near Ponyville itself. Much as Twilight's cloak had been torn from her, Spike had lost a sense of security and safety in just the past few hours. Even after supposedly making up, Twilight could still sense tension and distrust between them. She didn't think he would run away again, thankfully, but he was still clearly alienated. She just hoped with all of her heart that this would be a good first step in repairing the harm she had unwittingly caused, and mentally fortified herself for the worst as their escort party passed beyond Sweet Apple Acres gates. Soon they would be back in Ponyville proper, and there was no withdrawing from this plan now. And so Twilight did everything she could to keep her anxiety hidden as they passed the first few buildings of the township. Just as Twilight had thought, it wasn't long before they encountered the citizens within. The hustle and bustle caused by Spike's running around had calmed down in the time since Twilight was last here. Only a particularly dedicated few seemed to be keeping up search efforts, while the rest had gone back to their everyday routine. That changed when Twilight and company made their way down the streets, and it didn't take long for one set of wayward eyes to catch sight of the guards and their willing prisoners. At first, the pony who had noticed them had caught a glimpse of Spike, and he began to make some kind of an uproar, something along the lines of, "There it is!" from the sounds of it. But then his eyes drifted to Twilight, and he fell silent and wide-eyed, just like everyone else who had seen her today. The interruption of his outcry got the attention of a few other ponies, and it all just snowballed from there. Ponyville had never felt so alien and foreboding before. The silence that followed the first few sightings was quick to put perspective into her head. All she could hear was the light crunching of grass beneath her hooves as they all proceeded at a painfully slow rate. At least it felt like it. And the accelerating heartbeat pounding in her ears was accented by the utterly damning silence. Now and again, she could hear a few hushed murmurs between clusters of ponies, the gossip almost equally split between the unusual dragon and the unexpected alicorn. Rumors and speculations would start circulating around town. The guards surrounding her and Spike were enough to keep the worst at bay, but every now and again they had to turn away someone too curious to remain shocked in silence. That thin layer of outer protection didn't do anything to protect Twilight from her own thoughts, though. She could practically feel every single set of eyes on her as they marched ever onward, unrelentingly looking on her like a wondrous oddity. But then she was a wondrous oddity, wasn't she? Each one served to escalate the constantly growing sense of anxiety and dread within her. Every fiber of her being was focused on remaining as outwardly calm as possible, only allowing the occasional twitch of her ears to show her dismay. She kept telling herself over and over that every set of eyes on her was one that wasn't on Spike, and that was enough to help her keep her facade going. The act of walking into the town guard station brought with it a sensation of relief that was almost unrivaled, due to the sudden lack of eyes. Of course, just because they had gotten out of public view didn't mean they were out of this mess, which was made clear when the first guard asked her and Spike to continue down the hallway. They didn't put up any resistance, and Twilight brought Spike along as well. And after a much shorter walk through the precinct, with far fewer eyes falling on them, the two were brought into a dull room lit only by a single lamp, the only features being the stone gray walls, a simple table, a couple chairs, and a very large mirror. An interrogation room, if ever there was one. The guard politely told Twilight to wait here, and then walked off, closing the door behind him. There was no click of a lock, so the two of them weren't trapped. Not that a lock would be enough to trap them. Either Twilight's willingness to comply had earned her some trust, or the guards didn't want to tick her off again. Probably the latter. Whatever their reasons, the second that there was some privacy, Twilight let out a long sigh of relief. It hadn't been as bad as she thought it would be, but that short walk through Ponyville was still going to have ramifications, which weighed heavily on Twilight's mind.
It's gonna be okay. It's just gonna take some time.
Twilight silently told herself again, taking deep breaths to calm herself down.
It might take a few days, or weeks, or years, or decades, but everything's going to be fine.
Twilight? You don't look okay.
Once again, Spike served well as the anchor tying her to reality.
What's gonna happen?
The fear in his voice got Twilight to snap out of her funk, and she quickly restored her calm persona.
I already said, everything's going to be fine. But we're in a bit of an awkward situation right now. So right now we just need to sit down and explain.
A sudden tingling sensation ran across her body, stopping her dead in her tracks. Spike was plainly confused as he waited for Twilight to finish.
Explain what?
Twilight didn't answer. She was too focused on the unusual sensations tickling her body. It wasn't painful, nor was it invasive, but it was noticeable. It was akin to the feeling one gets when their leg falls asleep. Except it was moving, traveling in shallow waves up and down Twilight's body. Off-put, she snapped her attention to the large mirror and instantly knew what was going on. Everyone knew about the one-way mirrors that were used in these kinds of interrogation rooms, and how they were used to observe whatever was going on within. Twilight didn't need to be told what was going on beyond the glass.
Spike, do you feel weird at all?
Twilight didn't take her eyes off the mirror for a second.
Like a weird tingling sensation?
I don't think so.
Spike's anxiety only seemed to worsen with Twilight's question. He recoiled inward with a flinch, placing a claw against his chest in an attempt to better sense if anything was wrong with him.
What's going on? Is there something happening?
It's nothing bad. They're just checking me for illusions or something like that.
Twilight ruffled her feathers as the unseen scanning washed over her again.
And they're not being very subtle about it.
Why are they doing that?
They probably don't believe I'm actually an alicorn.
Twilight scoffed at the mirror with an almost smug grin.
Not that I blame them.
Wait, why would they even know about that? You...
The dragon's statement trailed off when he took a closer look at Twilight. His eyes widened into the same look Twilight had been receiving all day, if a bit different.
Your cloak! You're not wearing it!
Did you only just now notice that?
There was something of a short chuckle on Twilight's part as she smiled at him.
Well, you've had a lot of other stuff on your mind. Guess I can't blame you.
But why aren't you wearing it?
Now the only thing Spike was focusing on was Twilight, rushing up to her almost in a panic.
You told me before it was really important the ponies don't know about your wings, and we just walked through...
He stopped mid-sentence, horror appearing on his face.
We just walked through the whole town. I thought they were staring at me, but they were actually... Oh.
There was a deafeningly silent pause as Spike ran the ramifications through his head. Twilight cringed at him figuring it out on his own so quickly.
Why would you...
Because you are more important.
Twilight answered without hesitation.
You don't need a million ponies gawking at you right now. This is the only way I could think of to get some of that attention off of you.
The unwilling investigation of Twilight's person ended at around this time, the magical tingling ending as quickly as it had started. Everything was quiet in the interrogation room, leaving Twilight and Spike to their own devices. As the minutes continued to tick by without change or interruption, they both found themselves growing less and less anxious and more bored than anything else. They used the time wisely, though, with Twilight putting in an effort to try and ease Spike's concerns, as well as his dismay towards everything that had happened today. To her delight, there was some progress being made. It was slow progress, but Spike was starting to come back out of his shell. With every moment, he was drawing ever closer back to the Spike that Twilight remembered and loved. The healing process had started, and that was what mattered most right now. After almost 70 minutes of waiting, someone finally came into the room, which served as a swift and potent reminder that they were both in hot water. An older Earth Pony mare, not quite as old as Granny Smith, stepped into the room with little fanfare. She carried with her a dossier, likely containing everything she believed she needed for this discussion. Her dull tan coat and silvery mane were grayed with the sign of her age, while her golden-framed glasses and green ascot gave the impression that she was important. Twilight recognized her instantly, having spoken with her briefly in the past. It had been a very brief and insubstantial occasion, just a quick greeting while Twilight had been in the process of registering as a citizen of Ponyville.
So they went all the way to the top,
she thought.
Guess nobody else knew what to do.
The mayor, Ivory, sat at the opposite end of the table and rested her folder on the wooden surface, glancing across it towards Twilight and Spike with rich indigo eyes, caught somewhere between curiosity and surprise. The lack of the now traditional wide-eyed stare tipped off Twilight that she had probably been informed she would be talking with an alicorn today. That didn't stop her from modestly gawking, as even being told in advance about what she was getting into wouldn't necessarily prepare her for the unusual encounter. After an awkward silence, though, the mayor cleared her throat and began speaking.